Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu is in an epic pile of calamitous doo-doo, it would appear, and there might not be any way out for him this time either, as his day in court has finally come, it seems. Good news on the face of it, although this might not necessarily be the court you might have expected him to be stood in, or hoped to see him stood in. Most of the world wanting him, of course, to have a day in the dock at the Hague. But this may bring about the more desirable result, being that of the end of the war in Gaza and beyond being driven by a man blatantly in it to secure his own position and keep his backside there, which also keeps him out of prison. This has for a long time been seen as the main driver of this war in Gaza by those paying particularly close attention to it, as this channel has been for the last year now. If the war ends, Netanyahu faces serious jail time potentially on charges of corruption. Netanyahu corrupt? Well, I never, you might be thinking. But there it is. This war has provided him with a convenient excuse to keep postponing his day in the dock, however. But his time has now run out, and an Israeli court has said enough is enough. Get your backside in here now. Right, so the thought of Benjamin Netanyahu ending up behind bars is a mental image for many of us of Christmas coming early, perhaps. A vision he was seemingly able to defy and push aside due to this war in Gaza he started, and the war he is spreading even further, a wider war. The perfect answer right now to him avoiding facing up to those corruption charges levied against him. But it seems the Jerusalem District Court has disagreed with him, and his latest attempt to postpone giving his own testimony, which is kind of needed in order for things to progress, of course, has been denied, and it will go ahead on the 2nd of December as planned. So 2 weeks, BB, roughly, you've got to answer some questions. The excuse to keep doing this has, of course, been the war. The war where Netanyahu has screwed up every ceasefire talk going, incidentally, by changing the remit of his negotiators or refusing to agree to terms even when handed absolutely everything he asked for, as Hamas actually did on one occasion just to catch him out. The excuses given by Netanyahu's lawyers that Netanyahu is too busy managing a war, that we need a leader who is entirely focused on that and cannot be distracted with simple matters of justice. An excerpt from the Cradle detailing the words of Netanyahu's defence attorney Amit Haddad reads, "The Premier's defence attorney Amit Haddad argued that Netanyahu has been busy managing the war. Netanyahu is managing the entire war. There are weeks when we can't meet with him. How can this be ignored? Do we not want a PM whose head is entirely in managing the war?" the lawyer asked. "We've done so much to prepare for this testimony. Meetings have been cancelled or postponed when other things came first," he added. He also rejected the prosecution's claim that delaying the trial violates the principle of equality under law, and added that Netanyahu should not have to testify without preparing properly. The Prime Minister's criminal trial is now approaching the end of its 4th year. Yes, for 4 years, Netanyahu has been able to stall these corruption charges. This war is an absolute gift to him to keep on stalling. And for those who think Netanyahu may have engineered this war in Gaza with everything that has ensued and followed, it is possible, if that is definitively proven at some point in future, that he did it to keep himself out of jail. Think about that, if proven. Everyone who has died, no matter what side they're on, will have done so because of one man's determination to evade facing justice himself. I mean, nothing quite says innocent like starting a genocide to avoid giving testimony, does it? That remains conjecture at this point, though, of course, doesn't it? Now, for anyone unaware of the charges Netanyahu faces, or after 4 years of hold-ups may have forgotten, a corruption trial against Netanyahu was brought against him in May of 2020. The pandemic, of course, struck around that time, COVID-19, which caused it to be paused. And following that, the war in Gaza. So it has been delay after delay after delay. Netanyahu was indicted on November the 19th, 2019, on the basis of 3 separate investigations, which at trial have become 3 separate cases, catchily named Case 1000, Case 2000, and Case 4000. Case 1000 alleges that Netanyahu and his wife Sarah received gifts from an Israeli Hollywood producer called Arnon Milchan and an Australian billionaire and Israeli citizen called James Packer. These gifts, it is alleged, were given in exchange for political favours. So the charges here are of fraud and breach of trust, which under Israeli law carry prison sentences of 3 years. Milchan has already testified in the case and confirmed he did give Netanyahu gifts in June of 2020. Case 2000 accuses Netanyahu of negotiating with one of Israel's daily newspapers, Yediot Ahronoth, for favourable coverage, in exchange for legislating to inhibit and slow the growth of one of their rival publications. This also charges Netanyahu, therefore, with fraud and breach of trust. Case 4000, though, is perhaps the biggest one in terms of potential prison time, as in this case, Netanyahu is accused of again trying to negotiate positive coverage for himself and his wife by offering regulatory favours to Israel's biggest telecommunications company, Bezeq Telecom Israel, and to do so via a news website controlled by the chairman of Bezeq Telecom Israel. This case also carries charges, therefore, of breach of trust and fraud, but also bribery in this instance, and bribery carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison or a fine, which compared to the other sentence is a little bit weird. Longer prison term, or you just cough up some cash. But there we are. It isn't clear that if found guilty of all of these charges in all of these cases, worst case scenario sort of territory for Netanyahu, that he could be served to serve jail time concurrently or consecutively. But the Cradle has stated he faces up to 10 years in prison, so concurrently seems to be the thinking. On top of that, however, more charges against Netanyahu directly relating this time to the war he may or may not have engineered in Gaza may be around the corner as well, as investigations into what happened and what Israel knew ahead of the events of the night of October 7, 2023 have come under heavy scrutiny. Israeli police, specifically the investigative unit called Lahav 433, Israel's version of the FBI, have been examining the timeline of events leading up to that night and the Israeli response to that. And we've been told time after time that the current war, which is not a war but a genocide in Gaza, was instigated by that Hamas incursion into Israel, taking hostages and going on the rampage. This is the main narrative that's been sold to us for more than a year now, is it not? But it's also been heavily disputed for just as long. Egypt, as an example, have maintained that they warned Israel something was brewing from Hamas. And of course, in light of that, it's all the more suspicious that there was the watering down of security forces in the area of the Hamas breach on that night, that the breach was even possible, that the camera footage had disappeared from the security wall, that the Nova Music Festival was allowed to go ahead nearby, and so on and so forth. Israel did apparently know this attack was coming. That has been the claim. And there appears to be enough in that claim to have warranted this high-profile investigation, chiefly asking how did the Israeli government let this happen, and did they let their own people be taken hostage and or attacked in order to facilitate a move against Gaza afterwards, and was this all an exercise ultimately to kick Netanyahu's corruption charges, therefore, even further down the line? It is insane to think any one human could be so desperate and so self-absorbed as to go to these extraordinary and horrifying lengths with the death toll we're looking at purely in their own self-interest. It is a level of selfishness that is off the charts, that is incomprehensible. Yet this is where these investigations and that train of thought leads me, and perhaps it leads you to the same place. That thinking in turn leads on to what happens if Netanyahu is actually convicted. Can he be removed from office? Of course, if he's got prison time to serve, he would have to be. But he would almost certainly appeal it. If he's gone this far to save his backside and avoid these charges, of course he was going to appeal it. And the case would end up being dragged out further, being taken then to Israel's Supreme Court, which would likely drag matters out for years more to come. Beyond the point Israel indeed hold another set of elections, which it is far from certain Netanyahu would actually lose. If the Supreme Court find him guilty whilst in power, however, be this Parliament or the next, it would force him from office. As such, any further delay of several months, Netanyahu's team wanted to kick it down the road another 13 weeks, is delays which cannot continue. And so the Jerusalem District Court, it seems, has agreed with that. Netanyahu's team have complained that they've had no time to prepare because the Israeli leader has been completely focused on the atrocities he is presiding over, that he is carrying out. But the court has simply turned around and said, you've had 5 months to get your act together. Now you've got a matter of weeks to get the job done, so you better get on with it. And fair point to them for that. I and many other commentators have long said the wars, plural, Israel has started on multiple fronts, were to keep Netanyahu's government together, because he couldn't dodge this court case unless he remained in power, and couldn't continue his atrocities either if he was out of power. It seems Israel's legal system, at least at this point, agrees with that assertion, but also don't accept it as a reasonable excuse to not put him on the stand and take his testimony anyway. What has Netanyahu himself said of this set of events going on against him then? This ruling going against him? Well, it's a witch hunt again, of course. I do wish he'd changed the record. Well, it's always a witch hunt, because it always is when it comes to him. December might get off to a very heated start for a man who absolutely deserves nothing less, therefore. I should view that testimony with interest. Giving him another headache right now, though, are the Iranians. Israel has long been warning of Iran's nuclear threat, and Western leaders have talked up much the same thing. So Iran have just gone to the UN and said to them, let's have a chat about that, shall us? We're here to be open and transparent, which has wrong-footed a lot of leaders worldwide. However, there is a catch to it. Check out that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.